You are tuned in to Relativity.
Wait, are we live? We're live. Let's get real.
Relativity. Realitivity. Relativity. Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 1 of Relativity. I'm Mitch.
I'm Petra. We're back for V1. Mitch, how's it feel?
It's awesome. I can't wait to get this started. I think today we're going to start on our first stop on the Atlas. And from there, we're going to just kind of hit a bunch of areas that we're going to branch out to. And so we talked about it and the sun, the center of our universe. Now, I know the trolls are going to get mad and say, you're an idiot. It's not the center of the universe. Okay. But really, for us, the center of our Atlas. And that's kind of how we're going to peel off and find all these really cool things to talk about.
Absolutely. And people used to think it really was the center of our universe, and it took a lot of scientific discovery and exploration to reveal, otherwise. So I think it's a good place for us to start. And for all intents and purposes, until we become a spacefaring people, it is the center of our universe, and that's why we're here.
I think so. I came with this quote from Carl Sagan, and I mean he's had so many great quotes throughout his life, but he had this one that was, our ancestors worshipped the sun, and they were not that foolish. It makes sense to revere the sun and the stars, for we are their children. And that, so I really started thinking about that, and so the elements, all of our elements and everything else come from the stars, and they make up the planets and the comets and everything else that's kind of feeding us. And so I just thought that was such a great quote to get from him, and it's probably with, I know I sit outside and just look up at the stars, and I'm full of wonder when I look up at the stars and how everything came about. So
Absolutely. I feel like it's one of those first things as a kid that makes you wonder, like, why we're here and what we're doing here, is like looking into the starry canvas and just, is anyone else out there? If we're here because of the heat and light of our sun and the energy of our sun, like, there must be something else out there. It's that, like, curiosity. It's like the expanse out there just makes you want to know why.
yeah, absolutely. So I know, one of our goals is to definitely not get political. We never say anything about religion, but I actually think we have to have religion mixed in with our science discussions. I think a lot of that is closely tied. So I'm going to jump in right away with my first bit of religion here is, uh, in many ways, the Big Bang and the idea that God said, let there be light, or whatever the quote is, it all kind of makes sense, right? And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about. It's the sun, the stars, they're the givers of life. And I think the first thing I'm going to go to is, the mighty photon. So much of our life is possible because of that radiation and that photon.
Absolutely. I mean, you think about everything from, the reason that we see, right? Because
Yeah.
light's bouncing off of things, and we process that in our brains. And I think that would be a cool topic. Put that down on the Atlas,
All
Mitch.
right. So that's a stop on the Atlas.
Yeah, that's a stop, exactly. And also just, the ability of photons, and how they have evolved an understanding from particles to waves. I think that's, like, just one of the really interesting things to hit on as we think about the fact that our world changes as we observe it.
Well, I think you hit on something that's definitely going to be a stop, and that's quantum mechanics, right? And so I think some of the early work and some of the early experiments kind of use the photon to help, validate. But quantum mechanics is going to be probably a multi-episode discussion, because so much of it is philosophy, and physics really is, there's I won't even call it a fine line. There is theoretical physicists who are just as much philosophy, and trying to, and they're it's dogma. They're divided into these groups of, I believe this, and if you're not following this, good luck getting tenure at these, these universities, et cetera. And I think that discussion will be there's quantum mechanics, but then there's also this: does that set us back academically, research wise, and what should I mean? We got these brilliant minds arguing these theories that we will probably never be able to prove out for thousands of years, and they're not recommending any experiments. And I think there's some of that's needed, but at the same time, should we be focusing on some near term physics and theories and things that we might be able to set up experiments for? So, roadmap one, quantum mechanics, and roadmap two, or another stop on the atlas is probably talking about academics and succeeding in the academic world. And again, we got there from the sun somehow. I don't know.
Well, yeah, that's hilarious. It's a perfect example of the rabbit holes we can go down. But I think it's interesting what you're talking about is almost the reason that we started this show, which is there are all these, like false dichotomies, like, okay, either I'm scientific or I'm religious, right? Either I am a philosopher or I'm a physicist. Like there's all this whole perception that you can't be both. And really we found like with the great, scientists and innovators of our time, there are always people who kind of cross these different domains. So as much as you would, it's easier to think of people as broken down into these little categories, but the more that we impose categories on things, the less they make sense. I think you should be able to be religious and still, be fascinated by the stars and how we came to be. I think you should be able to study quantum mechanics and still consider the philosophy of what your discoveries mean. I just think it's this whole tendency of the world to put people in little boxes and categorize that it just doesn't actually serve us.
Well, we like tribes. We like tribalism, and I think that's a part of human nature that's very hard to break. We're seeing that now, with so much stuff that's going on in the world, and so yeah, I think this is going to be an interesting stop. And I think one of the things you said got me to thinking about the term faith, and I think in religion, there's a lot of people out there that there's some historical data, there's archaeological data, there's some things written down, but then there's this big leap of faith to go from that to, some dude parted the sea and they took chariots across the muddy seabed and no one got stuck. And, so there's that part of it. And you have to have a lot of faith there. But on the flip side of science, we're talking about things that we're just barely beginning to understand. And some of these things, we've got particle accelerators and electron microscopes and all these things that are allowing us to see what used to be really kind of had to be taken on faith. And then you don't have to go too far back, that we were taking some of this stuff on faith. And then some of these theories in physics, very much so you're taking on faith, especially on stuff that you can't really do experimental test on. So I think the whole discussion on faith, it's not just for the religion, right? It's there's stuff in science. And you have to question that. And I think one of the things we fail to do is sometimes we don't question our intellectual leaders in areas of physics and maths, because most of us can't. Man, we're going to talk about quantum mechanics. Man, I'll tell you now, I know about an iota of it. I can, my understanding quickly just goes away. So how am I supposed to talk intelligently with anybody about quantum mechanics? And you can take that road and go many different ways, whether it's chemistry or math or whatever. I mean, that's in some ways that's why we look to these people to be experts. But at the same time, we got to be questioning those experts, and who's going to do that?
I think it's a good point. And obviously, we're not saying that we're experts in any of these domains, but there's also this tradition of questioning the established science, right? It's like a couple hundred years ago, everyone knew that the sun was at the center of the universe, right? A couple hundred years ago, everyone knew that the earth was flat. These developments which have changed our world all came from people questioning the status quo and saying, hey, I don't think that's right. And I love the point you're making about faith and how, it kind of seeps in everything we do. Like I could ask you, when was the Declaration of Independence signed? And the answer, but like, how do you know? Well, I read it somewhere. Okay, like I agree with you, that's when it was, but you and I weren't there. Our grandparents weren't there. Their grandparents weren't there. We have trust in the scientific process
Yes.
as we should, but there is this element of trusting what others have done before you so that you can build on it. There's I think it was Sir Isaac Newton, though I'm gonna have to look it up now, who said, if I have seen further, it is because I stand on the shoulders of giants. So we trust what others have figured out, and we use that to launch into the future, which is not saying, not in any way to invalidate the scientific process, but just to say that there's this element of faith in all that we do, and it actually helps us to grow. And going back even further to like the tribalism conversation, it's evolutionary, right? Like the first categorization that we had to solve in order to survive was like friend or foe. So immediately as like,
Fight or flight.
yeah, we had to, because if we solve that wrong, you die.
Yeah.
So, kind of high stakes there, but that's still entrenched in everything we do. And like, are they friend, are they foe? Are they my tribe or not? Are they dangerous to me or not? And funny enough, we had to trust the, which is partly why we're so social, trust the communication of others that tell you that, no, this person's cool. No, that monkey's not going to hurt you. Like you can cross that river. So we built this kind of foundation of you can trust what someone else will say, and that will enable you to get further than you could on your own. Communication, I think, is a cool one, like language, the development of language for another stop on the Atlas.
Oh, I think that one will take us many places. I was actually, just before we got on, I was watching a TED talk about cave paintings and common symbols that this lady was finding um, it, across, not just like these cave paintings in Europe or in Africa, but I mean, across the world, there was this set of common symbols. And how in the world, do you see, things that are common when in theory nobody was doing, that kind of travel? How is that happening? And I think in many ways it'd be interesting to say if you were to really isolate people from different areas and say, okay, here's a problem, solve it. And how much of our brain and our makeup would lead people to something very similar in solution. I'm not going to say they're all going to be the same, but like if I don't know, if we wanted to say the international danger sign is a triangle, for the most part triangles are seen all over the place, and that's not a great analogy, but I'm trying to get at. But I'd be curious to see, where they probably came up with something very similar. I think our brain, there's just a weird connection in our brains that help us think the same way.
There's a very cool project. I don't know if you were there while we were discussing this hypothetical project, but it was about thinking long term and thinking say 10,000 years into the future, as we must for things like, well, this is yet another stop, but for things like nuclear waste, how do we warn people in 10,000 years that this is dangerous and they can't go near these nuclear waste containerized facilities? Like, what possible signage could we come up with? Like, you do skull and crossbones, but if they don't do representative, symbolism, then they're just going to see it as squiggles. Like, if they haven't figured out what a skull looks like, how are they going to be able to interpret that say civilization's wiped out and they're starting from scratch? Are they really going to understand a skull and crossbones? So that thought piece is so interesting to me. I just love thinking about like, how could we ensure that we're understood like eons and millennia from now?
So what you're saying is all those handprints on the wall are usually just stop. There's something down here. You shouldn't go any further.
Don't you think? I mean, that's like the best one. Like, don't go closer.
Yeah. So that's very interesting. So yes, communication, symbolism. I think all of that is going to be a very interesting topic. I love the idea, and I think we should really dive into that. What do we do in the future? One of the things that I often think about, we're far from the sun, but we'll get back to it here in a second. I know how to tie this back to the sun. This is a good way to tie this back to the sun for something I want to do here. So here in New Mexico, we have an awful lot of rock art, and it falls into two different kinds. Some of it's painted, and some of it's actually chipped into the rocks, right? Here in New Mexico, we also have a lot of graffiti, not just under bridges, but a lot of people are painting, on the side of cliffs and rocks and stuff. And I get so upset when I see it, right? Because here you are in nature, driving down the freeway. I don't know how much, that's still nature to me. But anyway, you see somebody painted on this rock. Now, can you imagine, the chief of some pueblo up here just north of me yelling and screaming at the young kids that went out and either painted or chipped away a symbol of a buffalo or a sun. We have an awful lot of sun images chipped into the rocks, painted on the rocks and stuff here. So can you imagine someone being upset for that? But is it the same thing? What are people going to look back at some of these rocks that we've painted on and try to figure? Archaeologists are going to try to figure out. Well, look at here. Billy Bob loves Darlene. It's written right there in John Deere Green. I heard that song someplace. Um, my dad's a big country fan, so I have to, endure country music. But anyway, so that's pretty interesting, and they're gonna be like, well, look, this was a way that they showed love for people, or something. I don't know. So I'm always torn between should we allow the kids and others to just go off and paint rocks? Is it going to be an archaeological find some point in time in the future? Uh, I don't know. It's
It
interesting.
almost, I mean, it almost has to be right, because whenever we find like a new Mesopotamian clay pot, that was trash to them. It broke, they threw it out, and to us, it's a find, right? Like everything's amazing if it happened, thousands of years ago or hundreds of years ago or sometime where we can't go back and ask them what they meant by this.
Yeah.
I'm torn too, because you know, as someone who cares about history and cares about studying other cultures, like I don't want anything to be removed from the historical record that we should absolutely, endeavor to keep. But at the same time, thoughts and opinions and Billy Bobs of today have every right to, make their art. And if that's their art,
Yeah.
maybe just don't do it over somebody's buffalo cave painting. I don't know.
And yeah, that's the interesting part. Just don't deface something that was art to somebody a long time ago. So I was going to bring that back to the sun, and really one of the things that I definitely one of the places that I want to explore and talk about more is Chaco Canyon here in New Mexico. But related to this is the sun, and we have in New Mexico we have a lot of Native American groups that a wide variance, but the Anasazi, as they're often called, or the ancient ones, these guys were kind of very mysterious. It's a mystery of where they came from. It's a mystery of where they went, and they definitely show a level of knowledge, especially in astronomy and tracking the sun and this type of stuff, and building in many cases as well. That far exceeds some of the other Native American tribes in this area. So that's kind of interesting. But really, what I wanted to get to here is they definitely. I'm not going to say they worshipped the sun. I can't say that they did that, but they were very knowledgeable of the sun, and they had kivas, which are these big holes in the ground, and they had the windows that lined up with the solstices and equinox. A lot of things like that. And one of the most interesting things they had on this on a place called Fajada Butte, they actually had these rocks, and they were stacked, and in the middle of these stacked rocks was a chipped spiral, and that's a symbol very common here to Native Americans, especially in the Southwest, is these spirals. And on the summer equinox and the no, I'm sorry, summer and winter solstice, the shadow or the it had a shadow, right? And as the sun went, the sun made a dagger, and the dagger would go up and hit the middle of the spiral and then go away on both of those days. And so, I mean, pretty interesting. My understanding is the rocks have actually fallen over in recent years, so that no longer exists. But there's a great documentary on that, and I think I just peel off from that. Not only do I want explore Chaco Canyon and what happened there, but so many ancient civilizations were obviously using the sun for a source, a calendar of when to plant, when to do this, and we can go back and look at so many hinges. So Stonehenge is common, right? That we know Stonehenge. But in that area, in England, in that area, there are many more hinges that have been found like that, all tracking the sun. Even here in America, in kind of the Mississippi Valley and all that, we had a whole bunch of Native Americans that were building massive, almost hinges with poles set up and tracking the sun and everything. So, the religion and the use of the sun in everyday life is goes way back in history.
It goes way back, and actually, I did some reading after I saw some of your ideas on the topic, and I had no idea that Well, so I knew that like during, Roman history and Mesoamerica and Plains Indians, and I knew how important the sun was. What I actually didn't realize was that, looking at Roman history, and the, before Christ period, that the feast of Sol Invictus, which is the unconquered sun, was on December 25th. And they celebrated it every year with great joy. And then this became Christmas. And
Yeah.
I'm not claiming to know like the thought process there or why this day became Christmas, but it's just so crazy to me that like kind of solar deity aspect and is so enriched in Christianity and in that religious tradition. Because you think of like sun worship, and there's all the sacrifices that were made in the Aztec era to their sun gods, and you think of the sacrifice of Jesus Christ and that kind of history. It's really interesting to your point earlier about how people evolve these weirdly similar thought patterns that don't necessarily seem related. But worship of the sun, it's absolutely everywhere.
Yeah. I've got a great George Carlin quote here for worshiping the sun. But before I get into George Carlin's got the best quotes on, yeah, and I love that about comedians, right? They take such an interesting look at the world, and of course they're trying to get a comedic response, but they're also very deep, I think, in a lot of cases with what they've put forward. But I also saw the whole thing about Christmas as well. And one of the things that I also started to find, and I think this is another great stop, is is this transition from what people call the paganism into Christianity and the offshoots there, so much of the symbolism. So there were so many things that so like this staff that you see like the popes and everything have, and there's this sun and even the halo that goes around, some of the early art and everything. It's all sun related. Now there's a bunch of people. This community is very very vocal about um, what that means and what that doesn't mean. But it's an interesting path to go down because the symbolism came from it obviously came from the pagan symbols, from the Roman era and probably even before. You can even see some of the Egyptian stuff kind of creeping into some of that. So very interesting. But let me hit George Carlin. I wish I could deliver it the way George Carlin would deliver it because it'd be quite funny. I've begun worshiping the sun for a number of reasons. First of all, unlike some other gods I could mention, I can see the sun. Haha, the photon once again. It's there for me every day, and the things it brings me are quite apparent all the time: heat, light, food, and a lovely day. There's no mystery. No one asks for money. I don't have to dress up, and there's no boring pageantry. And interestingly enough, I have found that the prayers I offer to the sun and the prayers I formally offer to God are all answered at about the same 50% rate.
That's excellent. I think we're gonna have to put that quote, all of our quotes in the show notes, really, because
Yeah,
I think
absolutely.
it's really great.
That's something I don't think we've talked about is that there'll be show notes accompanying this on our website with links to some of the things that we have found, and of course the atlas will be up, the 2D atlas for now, but hopefully soon we will have this very cool virtual reality world that you can see how everything is tied together. So Petra, there was a couple things in there that I wanted to actually hit on, and number one is really energy. Um, to me, the sun is the ultimate source of energy, and if you were to ever think about the perpetual motion machine that's eluding us all the time, the sun is pretty close. It's not infinite, but to us it might as well be. So I think there are many stops in the discussion of energy, but I think first off, I think I'll probably kind of talk to you about nuclear energy, right? I mean, splitting the atoms or fusing the atoms, whichever case might work out for us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's so many places to go to this, but I found myself thinking about, um, well, I guess the fact of Earth being like a Goldilocks planet. I mean, I don't know. I love thinking about the search for extraterrestrial life and all the different possibilities there. But it's just so interesting to think that Earth is inspired, or the sun has inspired all the different ways of energy here on Earth, and it's only really been in the last like 50 years that we've actually just started harnessing like the energy from the sun. I think it's crazy. I was I was reading about how like, what did it say on Noah? Okay, Earth reflects an average of 30% of incoming solar energy back to space. So the atmosphere absorbs about 20% of incoming solar energy. And then 50% reaches the land and oceans and warms them. And then of the incoming energy that comes in, we emit 70% back to space. Anyway, it's just really interesting to think about. I think there was a study of Kepler, from the Kepler Space Telescope, that there could be as many as 300 million, of those Goldilocks planets that are not too hot, not too cold. They're within, reach of a star, kind of analogous to our sun. And that's just in our own galaxy. So like even within like 30 light years, I think there's going to be a bunch of other ones. Anyway, that's not really nuclear energy, but it's energy in general. And I don't know. I don't know how we're going to cover this one, Mitch. We're going to have to do all kinds of energy ones, and solar and nuclear.
Yeah.
And going back to my nuclear waste quandary earlier, how do we tell people in the future not to mess with nuclear waste? And, if one of these fusion companies works out, we may not have to tell them.
True, and I also think that we seem to be stuck in this world of where we only talk about um, energy from either solar or wind now as the alternatives to carbon, and I think that's great progress for us, right? We're going to have some economic discussions to help us, ferret out some of these ideas of how does this pay off, and I don't just mean pay off in terms of financial, right? I mean, there are many things that you have to think about. One of them is 10,000 years down the road, that there's still waste from some of this stuff. But at the same time, with solar and some of these others, we have to capture that energy to use it. And so that's going to require some batteries. And batteries are quite costly overall, right? I mean, we have to mine the materials for these batteries, and it's not. Um, it's not the cleanest mining that you're ever going to see, and we get better with every 10 years of mining. We're finding new ways of increasing yields and doing better, but there's still holes all over this damn planet that are just, we've cut down mountains to get molybdenum or whatever the hell it is that we need, for our things. And it's hard to say that any of us want to give up. I don't think anyone wants to go backwards in time, right? I think we all want to continue to have we're probably living in the best time to ever be alive. And I think every single day, it will always be the best time to be alive. It might not always seem like that based on the news and the fighting and everything else, but we are seriously reducing the number of people that are in poverty. We are giving people clean water and heat, and our lifespans are increasing. Women aren't dying in childbirth, and we're not losing kids between the ages of 1 and 5 nearly the same rates. And so all those kind of indicators that say we're doing better, we are, right? And I think also anytime that we're challenged with something like nuclear waste, or what are these components that make up our cell phones, right? There's some gnarly shit in our cell phones, and the way in which we get them is really bad. But I think that we're going to be challenged to find new components that will replace those in the future. And it sucks right now. I get it. There's that great movie, or documentary. It's on YouTube, and it's going to slip my brain. But it's a guy challenged Nokia because Nokia was doing a really good job of tracking all of their where their materials came from, or so they thought. And this guy went and he actually traced down some of the elements down to where they were mined in Africa, and it is a horrific story of what happens to the individuals in Africa. But at the same time, when you look at the people in Africa that were working in those mines, it is a better life than what they thought they were going to have, because they only have this job and a hope for, moving to the city, getting an apartment, whatever the case may be. And I'm not here to justify that by any means. It's still a horrific job that these guys had to do, but I guess I'll say what a great friend and mentor to me said is, oftentimes where you stand is often where you sit. And that's to them, there is definitely an improvement in life for doing something that we look down on as, not necessarily look down on. We don't see the same way that they see it. We look at it as like, well, this is really, really bad way to treat people.
Yeah. There's so many interesting things that you were talking about there, but what gives me hope is the idea of a circular economy, which I would love to make a stop on our atlas. It's kind of reflective of the way that the ecosystem works naturally, right? Like they're, like sun nourishes plants, they grow, they decompose, they provide fertilization for new plants, and the cycle goes over and over. So instead of, say, like these awful mining conditions that we have to basically pull all the valuable metals out of the Earth's surface and leave these horrible scars in the Earth and also horrible living conditions for people. How can we design computers and cell phones and all of our electronics, cars, electric car batteries, all kinds of different things? How do we design them so that we can actually take the technical components out, the, silicon, the lithium, the other rare metals? How do we take that out and actually be able to reuse it? And there's a couple of companies who are literally going through like, e-waste and trying to recycle and refabricate valuable components out of these thrown away, cell phones and computers. And, how many cell phones have you had at this point? It's a large number. So if we can design things to, instead of being thrown literally into the garbage heap, but so we take apart the part that doesn't work anymore, we recombine the elements, and then we add it with the latest screen or the latest processor, take all the other parts and kind of melt them down and build them back into something new. There's this potential to, like what if all the components that we would ever need to manufacture future products are already mined, and we just have to stop throwing them away and start reusing them. So it's still a dream at this point. There are companies working on it, but I think it's a really interesting way of viewing the world, instead of this like buy something, throw it out in 2 years, buy something, throw it out in 2 years. Like you could keep the components forever and just kind of add the latest technologies to bring them to life.
I love that idea. I think one thing that we will always struggle with though is I seriously don't think that there is a limitation on a lot of these resources. We heard in the 70s that, oh my God, we're out of oil and gas, and and we keep finding. You turn your head and someone says, nope, new pocket, we're never going to run out, and new ways of getting to it, new ways of extracting. And so the what I'm concerned with on the approach you're talking about is you just have to dig a little bit deeper and you're going to find lithium. You just dig a little bit deeper, dig over there, and that is an incentive that is the opposite of a good incentive, right? And unfortunately, I don't know how to get people off of that, because that it's a hard one, right? There's the technology aspect that we have to deal with, and then I think there's the psychological aspect that we have to get people to get behind as well, because knowing that there's plenty of lithium or plenty of these other minerals and stuff that we need, it's so hard to get the companies that are making them to get away, because that's cheap. Bottom line, that's cheap. Now we're talking money. Now we're talking economics in terms of money, right? But it's not cheap in terms of all the harm that's being done.
Right. I totally agree that the model that we're not talking about is economic, which is what's driving these decisions. But I can see a world where if, I design my cell phone to have the back come off and there's parts that I can take out, wouldn't that be cheaper one day than like all these huge heavy materials that you have to drill into far corners of the earth and pull out deeper and deeper? I can see there being a world where the financial incentives might actually match, the other incentives, the environmental incentives. If we use intelligent, if we design things to be reused instead of to be thrown away, then we start to change the cost benefit analysis of doing that. I think it's today, of course not, but the more we look at that, the more we say, okay, how might I design this so that I can pop this out and just plunk it into another, future device? That's not even a consideration right now.
No, I love it. And I think, one of the areas that I really look forward to getting into is actually breaking down. So if we took solar and we really started breaking all of those things down, and we did, the financial economics, the socioeconomics, all the other things that kind of go along with it, and then really compare that to, let's compare it to petroleum, let's compare it to wind, let's compare it to nuclear energy. I'm keeping my fingers crossed for fusion. I really, I hope something can happen there. And I think, when we do that, I think the challenge here with you and I, and hopefully we have some people that can join us and talk about it intelligently, is is hit those different things, but also talk about that 10,000 year point that you brought up. What is it 50 years? What is it 500 years? I think we should get some nice little, numbers there that we kind of put the same scale onto all of these and think and push that out. It's going to be a really interesting to research that and put that together.
Couldn't agree more. Couldn't agree more. We got so many interesting discovery paths to go down in our atlas. I feel like we need a better name than stop. What are we going to call them? Points on the atlas, constellations, stars.
Man, I think some are points, some are their own galaxies. It almost seems like energies almost takes on a form of a galaxy. It's there's just so much to dig in. And I think a lot of these, I think I hate to use absolutes, but I'm going to use an absolute because that's what we're trying to get to the nuances of a lot of this discussion, right? And what I think we're going to see is that all signs go back to communication, and that's one of the things I think that we're not communicating this stuff very well. When we talk about energy, it's usually in a soundbite, and in no way can a soundbite fully articulate. You get one side talking how great solar is and the other side how bad it is, and they use one example and they never go through all the other things that have to be considered before we can make these informed decisions, especially for those who are not deep in it, right? And so I think every one of our places on the atlas are going to go right back to communication. And I think, that's pretty important. I think both of us are very intrigued, and I know you for certain. Communication is what you do. And so I think the world, all of us have to look at how we communicate better. And I was going through my day job, if you will, recently. We had a test failure, but really it wasn't a failure. If we would have communicated what we were trying to accomplish early on, and we actually goes to a government authority. So when we didn't communicate correctly, we've now had this huge setback, and I think that's a lessons learned for all of us. We have to. There's a time where you can kind of just get the gist of things, but there's also a time that you need to sit down and have deep discussions and talk. Not correctly, but talk. Correctly. Say the right things.
Yeah, I am. No, I couldn't agree more. And I mean, as you know, the reason we're sitting here is that we both feel this giant emptiness in the public discourse about so many topics that matter. So obviously, I'm a big environmentalist. So I think a lot about how people are saying, okay, well, the solution is we'll just plant 1 billion trees. And it turns out if you plant trees over wetlands, well, wetlands are actually very natural carbon sinks. So if you add trees, you disrupt those areas, you're actually not doing any favors to the earth. Or there's another good one, which I thought seemed like such a naturally good idea, which is there's so much dark surfaces. If you look at Los Angeles, where I live, or really any city, right? It's tar, it's dark roofs, it's really hot. There's what they call the urban heat island effect because of the concentration of dark surfaces and no green areas. It makes it, 2 degrees hotter on average than the surrounding suburbs. So the solution that was very popular for amount of time was paint all the surfaces white, which makes sense, right? It will reflect back to the sun. See, I brought it back. It will reflect out the sun. But then there were some other voices that said, hey, actually, if you reflect back the sun into the atmosphere, you're going to intensify the greenhouse effect.
Yeah.
And instead, you should plant, green roofs because obviously plant life, naturally hangs on to it keeps buildings more cool when it's hot out, and it actually helps buildings retain heat when it's cold out. I got lost there. But
no worries.
But there's all this nuance to things, and everyone wants a silver bullet, whether it's for climate change, which I'm talking about, or so many other things. Everyone wants a silver bullet, and they just don't exist. They don't exist.
Well, and I think the carbon cycle is going to be it's probably another galaxy in the atlas. It's a very complicated. It goes well beyond what we probably remember from elementary school, where you had, the rain falls in the mountains and the water goes down, it gets in the ocean, goes back into the clouds, kind of that same, what does that little pictorial look like for the carbon cycle? And it's so complex. and there's so many things that play off one another. So just as an example, as we have a greenhouse gas effect, and as we, you know, melt or warm up the tundra releases methane, and methane, absorbs. I think it's like 7% or 7 times higher, or 7% greater than, no, it's 7 times greater than carbon dioxide as far as a greenhouse gas. Well, so that's a vicious circle, right? But then there's, okay, so what do we do if we capture carbon? Where do we put that carbon? Because if you if you put it back into the earth, maybe, there you could do supercritical fluid at the bottom of the ocean, and maybe it just stays there. But then do we need a sign that tells somebody, don't release all this carbon at the bottom of the ocean? Some 10,000 years later. If we put it into our trees and everything else, that becomes biomass at some point in time, which creates methane once again. Our landfills, and if we chop down trees, and it's a big balance. And I think, I think we would all benefit if we had to have an aquarium or a terrarium and maintain it at your home, because it is an impossibility to get this thing set up, because we just don't have enough of the right stuff in that small little environment that we have made and we are trying to manipulate. And so I actually believe that there are so many people that are trying to do the right thing, but at this point in time we don't always know, is that the right thing? And one of the things that I like to always use as this little analogy is, when we discovered asbestos, there wasn't people sitting around with a diabolical laugh, ha ha ha, in 50 years I'm going to cause all these people, lung cancer. It was literally built and saved many, many lives in trying to keep us safe from fires, right? But we had no idea what was going to happen in the future with that. And that, I think, is the same with many, many technologies. Sometimes it's a total loser, and just bad things are happening, like asbestos. But I also think there's the case for nuclear energy, which has the potential. The amount of mining that you have to do to get nuclear energy is so small compared to what we have to do for coal, or even for all this other stuff that we're going to need for the batteries and the solar panels and all the windmills and all that kind of stuff. We need a very small amount of nuclear material. And I mean, we're going to start talking about the points of, can we get it from seawater at some point in time too, right? Yep. Which and from that, can we start doing things like desalinization of ocean water, because we now have the power? And I think one of the things, and I think this will come apparent throughout our discussions, all of these things, even trying to go as green as we can, right, or reverse some of these climate changes, requires power in some way. Nothing comes for free. So we have to figure out how to get power. And by the way, power is what has pulled so much of this world out of poverty, right? And poverty not just being the amount of money you make a day. Poverty being everything from, raising your expected lifespan, having clean water, not cooking in stoves that you're breathing in that same damn gas. Not, I shouldn't call it a stove. I should call it, an oven, a wood-fired oven, a coal-fired oven, a dung-fired oven. Energy is at the heart of all of those things. Well, I just went on a tangent. Sorry about that.
No, it's good. I will say briefly that any studies of indoor air pollution, it's the problem we didn't know we had, because we all use cleaning products and gas stoves and don't realize how bad it is. It's like a whole new field. Everyone's always like, the air is bad, stay inside. It turns out problems there too. Anyway, that's even another tangent, which we'll deal with all in due course. But you're absolutely right. I love the point you made about how a lot of the technologies that we've made and developed, we didn't realize what was going wrong. Like, you think back to the Industrial Revolution and this incredible force for lifting people out of poverty and giving them more opportunity. And, no one was designing to reduce carbon emissions back then. Like, of course, why would we even think about that? They were developing things that had never been developed, building things that could have never been built, like lifting up, creating a middle class from scratch. It's only now we look back and realize that our economy has never been intentionally designed to last 10,000 years, say, or to last any amount of time, or to, be sustainable, or to make sure that as our population explodes, that we still have all the resources we need to give those people opportunities. Like, it was never intentionally designed. It's kind of gone along in an ad hoc way, pushed along by all these innovators and inventors and scientists and business people. It's never been designed for a purpose specifically as one. So I don't think that will ever happen, but boy, would it be cool.
I love that line of thought. And one of the things, and I don't want to get off, I don't think this is really conspiracy world, but it's definitely a topic that I think a lot of people shy away from, especially the academics. But we obviously had some very, very advanced societies in the past, right? You can go every place around the world, and you can find these civilizations that were very advanced, and we can't explain a lot of how they knew what they knew. From the timelines that we know, there's kind of like this gap. It was like, well, supposedly we were hunter gatherers, just days before, and all of a sudden there's this monument. There's this monumental city in the jungles, and they keep finding they're using lidar now in the Amazon, and it's just like there's just cities popping up all over the Amazon underneath the canopy, and what happened there? They did not plan for 10,000 years down the road. And maybe we've become intelligent enough to plan for 10,000 years down the road. Now, again, I'm going to say something that's political, but I don't think we do. I think, at least here in the U.S., we plan on 2 and 4 year cycles. I know back we were working on a project. We actually did see something where China had was it a 50-year plan, or was it the year 2050 plan? It was one of those, right? But they had a long-term vision. But I'm not seeing a lot of that out there. Yes, we talk. Greta Thunberg's out. I hope I pronounced her last name correctly. First name's easy. I'm not sure I got the last name said correctly. Apologize. But she definitely is looking at a longer range plan than most people, and so I have hope. But again, I hope that I will see some of that come to fruition, but I'm not overly optimistic in those regards.
You and both, Mitch. You and me both.
So where does that leave us, Petra? We've got probably 80 stops laid out. I think I'll go back through and I'll look at write down all these things and try to figure out where to go next. And but I think this is a great start. I hope anyone who's listening to us right now is enjoying this and will engage us with topics or correct us where we're wrong or give us ideas of where to go next.
Absolutely. I would love for anyone listening to let us know which of these early Atlas stops they would love to hear next. And we have lots of directions to go. So the only challenge will be getting to all of them before, 10,000 years from now.
Okay. So I got two things. Before we finish, I got two things. We could probably just never stop. We could try to finish, but we'll probably just have to do the French goodbye and just shut this thing off at some point. Is it a French goodbye or the Irish goodbye? I've heard many different things.
Irish and the French goodbye. I don't know.
I'm gonna call it the Mitch goodbye because
here.
Yeah, well, I'm gonna call it the Mitch goodbye because that's how I like to exit parties. Hello, and then I'm just gone. Just
Me too.
gone.
I just
Where'd you go? I'm gone. So an interesting thing I actually heard the other day during the Industrial Revolution was the company. Now, I got to fact check this and look this up. But London Fog, the company that makes those really stylish windbreakers that old people wear, London Fog. It came from the you couldn't see around the city. It was from the smoke from the Industrial Revolution. Now, I think London is kind of foggy just to begin with, but I think I don't know if this is true or not. What was my other thing that I wanted to hit on? Oh well, I got sidetracked.
There was a whole disaster that happened in London sometime in the mid-century. I think it was in the 50s, but I have to check that as well. Where there was heavy fog and all the smoke they were burning from the coal plants just settled in, and they actually had horrific death rates from people inhaling the smog because it was just trapped. It was just trapped over the city and people going about their daily lives. They couldn't see around the corner, as you said, and it actually caused quite an uptick in fatalities.
That's interesting. Oh, I got a good one. To add to that, not being able to see around the corner. So the other day I was listening to something and someone was talking about the Brooklyn Dodgers and why they were named the Dodgers. It had to do with getting across the street. When you were in Brooklyn, you had to dodge all the traffic or you were dead. Dodgers.
I never knew that, and I'm in LA. The Dodgers now are. And I found it. The Great Smog was in 1952. So
1952.
Dodging is more fun. You can't really dodge fog. Dodge, duck, dive, and dodge.
Excellent. Well, great talk today, Petra. Look forward to the next one.
We went off the deep end at the end.
Yeah.
Hey, this is Petra. If you like this podcast, please subscribe wherever you get yours. Also, let us know what you're interested in, and we'd love to dig deeper and explore topics that you want to hear about. Thank you for listening to Realitivity, and tell a friend.